Hi, everybody. This is Scott Spreitzer with our Smash Mouth Top 25 Rankings Report for the week leading into this weekend, which will be November 16th and 17th. And as you know by now, each week after the new Top 25 rankings are released, we break them down in three categories. We're going to start this week with the most overrated ranked team. We've been spot on with our overrated ranked teams so far this season. And in fact, we had 2 weeks in a row where we ranked the Miami, Florida Hurricanes as the most overrated team. And of course, we saw what happened to Miami, barely escaping against North Carolina and Wake Forest before getting knocked off by Florida State and Virginia Tech the last 2 weeks. Last week, we had Oklahoma in this spot as our most overrated ranked team, and the Sooners had their tails sent back to Norman between their legs after a tough outing in Waco, Texas against the Baylor Bears. This week's overrated squad is the UCLA Bruins. Now, the Bruins are 7-2 overall. They're ranked 13th in this week's BCS standings. But UCLA still owns just one truly impressive win, and that came in Lincoln against Nebraska back in September. While beating the Cornhuskers doesn't mean as much as it used to, the way they beat them is what impressed me the most. However, Nebraska has struggled against mobile quarterbacks for a few seasons now, somewhat removing a little of that UCLA luster in that win. The Bruins win over Utah has as much to do with good fortune as anything else. They had a +4 turnover ratio in that game, yet Utah had a chance to tie the game up in the closing minutes. And the offense for UCLA was held to a combined 24 points in convincing losses to Stanford and Oregon, which were their only other two real step-up games thus far. Now, UCLA has home games coming up against Washington and Arizona State before ending the season in the Coliseum against USC. A 1-2 straight-up finish, not out of the question, and UCLA is this week's most overrated ranked team. My most underrated ranked team, the Wisconsin Badgers, have lost twice all season. They had the controversial loss at Arizona State in September and then lost by 7 points at Ohio State last week, and they had little trouble with a solid BYU squad, downing the Cougars 27-17 in a game that really was never in doubt. And we should note that Gary Anderson's squad is transitioning quite well into his style of attack, and they have scored at least 27 points in all but one game, scoring 24 in that loss to the Buckeyes. Wisconsin could be a little bit better passing the football, but they're 19th in the nation in total yards per game, 7th in the nation in total yards allowed on the defensive side of the football. And as I said last week in this spot, heading into their game with BYU last week, that the Badgers would need a little help to overcome Ohio State in the leaders division. Not likely going to happen, but Wisconsin at 22nd in this week's BCS standings is once again my most underrated ranked team. And finally, an unranked team that should be ranked this week's squad on the outside looking in, but should be in the ratings to me, is the Ole Miss Rebels. The SEC entry enters the week 6-3 overall this year. They're riding a 3-game win streak that includes a 3-point win over LSU. Now, the Rebels' only 3 losses came against Alabama, Auburn, and Texas A&M. And you know those teams ranked 1st, 7th, and 11th in this week's BCS standings. And with that and the fact that the first 2 of those 3 losses came on the road, I think this Ole Miss team is highly underrated. They won and covered on the road against a solid Vanderbilt team. They crushed Texas, and with games against Troy, Missouri, and Mississippi State left to be played, they've got a solid shot at a 9-3 season. And obviously, although it's at home, a win over Missouri would send this team into the top 25 as long as they don't slip up in the other 2 games. I doubt they will slip up. As for now, the Ole Miss Rebels are my unranked team that should be in the BCS rankings. That'll do it for this week's Smash Mouth Report. We're going to get into college basketball in the same type of perspective, ranking the top 25 each and every week in college basketball. That'll start in just a couple of weeks. For now, I'm Scott Spreitzer. Put your upcoming weekend in the win column, and we'll talk to you again next week.